Hey, book lovers. Want to hear a story? Hey, book lovers. Welcome back to Storytime with Em. This is a bonus episode from Em's Books and Cats podcast, where I am sharing some of my writing with you. And this week, I'm going to start a new book. Well, it's an old book, really. This is one of the first books that I wrote. It is the oldest of my books that is still available. There were a couple others, but they were pure trash. I've been playing around with self-publishing pretty much since it became a thing, and yeah, some things need to kind of disappear, you know? Anyway, the chapters in this book are kind of long, so I'm going to be breaking it up into parts just to make the story a little more digestible. They will all be in a playlist on the Books and Cats YouTube channel, or you can listen to them wherever you listen to podcasts. So this book is called Do You Remember Ella? I honestly cannot remember what year I wrote this. It might have been 2009. I think that's right. I don't know. Anyway, this one is available on Amazon and Kindle, but otherwise it doesn't exist anywhere until today. I can't even find the computer file. I was going to, maybe do a little revising and spruce it up, and I can't find it. So I am also going to be reading it on Kindle and sharing it with all of you. So if you are unsatisfied with where the story leaves off, you can always go purchase the book and keep reading. But without further ado, let's get started with Do You Remember Ella? Chapter 1, Part 1. Do you remember Ella? The words first appeared on Halloween. I was the only student at Cullen Academy to actually see them. I woke up earlier than usual that morning, threw on a cape and some black lipstick, and went to the library to finish a paper on Poe's classic, The Telltale Heart. The library was deserted at that hour. The only sound came from the grandfather clock in the corner of the room, as it ticked away the seconds. Mrs. Cray, the librarian, was startled when I entered the room, but soon resumed her serious scowl as she turned her concentration to the cart full of books that she was placing back on the shelves. I hurried to the back room, where a long wooden table surrounded by comfortable chairs would give me ample room to spread out my books and notes. On the wall behind the table hung portraits of the former headmasters of Cullen Academy. Their stern faces were the first things seen upon entering the room. I noticed the words immediately. They were impossible to miss. The red letters were scrawled across the ancient faces. They looked like they had been written in blood, and the entire scene was something out of a horror movie. I thought it was a joke at first, a Halloween prank intended to surprise the students. But Mrs. Cray came up behind me at that moment and screamed. Her face had turned a ghastly shade of green, and her lower lip trembled. She made me follow her out to the front desk and wait while she called the headmaster. I spent the rest of the morning being interrogated by Headmaster Quincy, the dean of students, the head of campus security, and several other teachers. They formed a tight circle around me and glared, while each took a turn trying to wrench a confession from me. I tried to explain that I knew nothing about it, but no one was listening. Their arms, crossed tightly across their chests, repelled any excuse I had. I was the first student on the scene, which was incriminating enough, but I had one other strike against me. I had been Ella's best friend. We really hadn't been that close. Ella was a quiet girl, and she never shared much of her thoughts or feelings with anyone. We were in theater together and had a lot of the same classes. We usually worked together on class projects because we were two of the few students at CA who were not complete morons. Cullen Academy was a dumping ground for rich kids who caused too much trouble or embarrassment for their parents. They were sent to CA to be hidden away until they were old enough to go away to college. Most of them could barely read, but their parents' money would ensure they got into the most prestigious schools. Cell phones and television were banned on campus, and they tried to keep the students cut off from the rest of the world. It was really a beautiful prison. When Ella left Cullen Academy, I was left without a lab partner, but otherwise, life continued as it always had. No one talked about her. No one thought it was odd that she left in the middle of the fall semester. No one noticed her absence at all. It was as if she had never existed. I did miss her. We were both weird and poor in a school for the rich and popular. I didn't have many friends and missed having someone to talk to. With Ella gone, I often went through an entire day without speaking to anyone. We had lived in the same dorm, just a few doors apart, and Ella had spent many evenings in my room. Even then, she rarely spoke, but I think I knew more about her than anyone else. The interrogation took so long that I missed my first 2 classes and was late for my 3rd period biology class. By that time, everyone had heard about my discovery, and I could feel all of their eyes on me as I slipped into my seat. My new lab partner, Byron, looked paler than usual and upset. He had also been Ella's friend. She'd had a huge crush on him, and though he had turned her down again and again, they had somehow remained friends. Byron was thin and pale, with floppy brown hair that constantly fell into his face and covered his light brown eyes. He laced his long white fingers together on the tabletop and coughed. I looked over at him and saw that the sorrow had returned. Few, if any, students or faculty members had felt anything when Ella was suddenly pulled out of school and sent home. And Byron and I had been alone in our suffering. I think he did love her despite his numerous rejections. Ella was like a roller coaster. Her emotions rose sharply and fell just as fast. However, unlike a roller coaster, Ella was completely unpredictable. Being her friend could be trying at times. Being her boyfriend would have been traumatizing. Byron tossed his hair out of his eyes and leaned toward me. He tapped the page of his open lab book. Did it really say? His voice trembled. Was it about Ella? I nodded, and his face went even paler. He looked like he was going to pass out. His ghostly fingers played nervously with the pages of his book, and he moved away from me as Mrs. Parker walked by. When she had passed, he gave me one last glance before bending over his work. I remember her. Every day. When the bell rang, I joined the crowd at the door and moved out into the mass of students filling the hallway. Usually the 5 minutes between classes were filled with loud laughter and students calling to each other over the staccato steps of 100 feet. Today, the noise was subdued. Their steps were slower and muted, as if everyone was aware of the impact and stepped lightly. They formed small groups along the hall, and I could feel their stares and hear their whispers as I passed. I walked faster and kept my eyes on the floor. I had almost reached my study hall when someone grabbed my arm. A small scream escaped my lips, and Byron quickly let go of me. He stepped back so suddenly he tripped over his own feet and was only saved from falling by a nearby trash can. Sorry, Sophie. I didn't mean to scare you. Can I talk to you for a minute? I have study hall with Mr. Franklin. He'll be pissed if I'm late. I just wanted to know if we could get together sometime and, talk about what happened. I guess so. I really have to go. He smiled slightly and the bell rang as I opened the door. Mr. Franklin glared at me and pointed to an empty desk. I glanced back before the door swung shut and saw Byron still standing in the hallway. His face was grave and troubled. He gave me a quick, solemn nod as the door clicked shut. The rest of the day was filled with questions. Some students, and even a few teachers, could not help commenting on the prank, and everyone believed that I was responsible. At first I tried to argue, but no one was listening. I gave up. They wanted the story and not the truth. Cullen Academy was located in a huge forested area of northern Vermont, not far from the Canadian border, and miles from anything that would tempt students to leave campus. The only gossip came from the students themselves, and the need for it created numerous absurd and completely false rumors. I was the newest victim, and could only hope that something would happen that was more enticing than words painted on a wall. I got lucky. That afternoon, the school was buzzing with new gossip. There was a transfer student at CA. His name was Marcus Gilroy, and he was the varsity hockey team's new goalie. Hockey was like a religion at Cullen Academy. Our school had a first-rate team, and many students had their failing grades pardoned because of a game-winning goal. They competed against several Canadian teams and did very well in the playoffs every year. Headmaster Quincy, following a long-standing CA tradition, canceled afternoon classes on game days, and the entire school packed into the rink dressed in layers of school pride and sweatshirts. Marcus had been recruited from a private school in Maine, and there was a rumor that he was being paid to attend CA and play hockey. I really didn't care who he was. I was just grateful for his well-timed arrival. The words marring the past headmasters' faces, and I, were completely forgotten. Marcus was in my algebra class, which was the last class of the day. Mr. Franklin, a bulldog of a man who was also the dean of students, escorted him into the room a few minutes after the final bell. Mrs. Miller was beginning to go over the answers to our last test, and I was growing more and more certain that I would be lucky to squeak by with a D. It would be pointless to try to describe Marcus's beauty. He was beyond words. His golden good looks were sexy, but also warm and safe. He looked like a protector, and I had a crush on him instantly, along with many of the other members of the student body. As he slid into the seat in front of me, he smiled, and I froze. My face was twisted into some kind of terrified attempt at a smile. He smelled like leather and pine trees, and his hair was the color of honey. My heart was pounding incessantly in my ears. It was so loud that I didn't hear my name being called over the intercom. Mrs. Miller lightly touched my shoulder, and the class laughed. I could feel my face growing hot as I grabbed my books and ran from the room. I pounded down the ancient wooden staircase to the first floor, where the offices were located. Headmaster Quincy and Mr. Franklin were waiting for me, and I followed them into Mr. Franklin's office. And that is going to end part 1 of chapter 1 of Do You Remember Ella? We are just getting started, and it's going to get crazy. But for now, I hope you have enjoyed this little taste of Do You Remember Ella, and I hope you will be back for more. I hope you have a great week, book lovers, and until next time, keep reading.